Hello, everyone. I am Mohamad Tavakoli, the inaugural director of the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute. I would like to invite Dr. Dolly Dastoor to come to the podium and start with a message from Dr. Bagli, please.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. My name is Dolly Dastoor from Montreal, or the editor-in-chief of FEZANA journal. But I'm going to read to you Dr. Bagli's message because he's unable to join us, but he's on Zoom watching us. Hi, Jehan. He writes, at the outset, I would like to express my deepest appreciation and sincere thanks to Professor Tavakoli, director of the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies, and his outstanding team of colleagues for organizing this event. It is incredibly humbling to see such learned colleagues speaking on a subject that has been the greatest personal passion of my life. Zoroastrian studies over the past decades have proliferated significantly into various facets of life. My personal journey in the subject started some 56 years ago when I was on holidays in India, when I received a letter from an esteemed member of the Quebec community. The letter mentioned that Zoroastrian community had a general meeting, and in absentia, I was voted in as president of the Zoroastrian Association of Quebec. This was a surprise to me, as I was unaware of any such meeting. It was then that I had to make a commitment whether to accept or reject the wishes of the community. As I was always interested in religious studies in general, I decided to accept the challenge and opportunity to study my own faith. As I looked further into the matter, one outstanding need revealed itself. That was the lack of Zoroastrian rituals and prayers written in English for young emerging priesthood in North America who could not read Gujarati script. As I continued the study of Zoroastrian assisted by my learned priests, we decided to embark upon solving the problems of rituals and prayers in English for young North American boys who ventured to go to India and be ordained as Zoroastrian priests. This led to the publication of several books, The Religion of Asho Zarathustra and Influence Through the Ages in 2003, and as co-author of Understanding and Practice of Jashan Ceremonies in 2001, Understanding and Practice of Obsequies in 2006, Congregational Prayers in 2007, Understanding and Practice of Navjot and Wedding Ceremonies in 2010, and Understanding and Practice of Concise Nava Ceremonies in 2014. Most recently, I was the author of Zoroastrian Theology and Eschatology, as well as the section editor for Zoroastrian Religion with the Encyclopedia Indian Religious publication by Springer Publications 2018. However, none of this says anything about the classical study of Zoroastrianism. We all know that original books of the faith are in Avesta and are really orally transmitted. They were scattered, brought over, and scriptures translated from Avesta into Pahlavi, and then into Sanskrit and Gujarati, and even of some of this in the European languages. We also know that Avesta, as it evolved, is the archaic era. It is not an easy language to study and or interpret. These translations are therefore subject to additions, deletions, and even misinterpretations. Thus, it was crucial that we continue our efforts to fully comprehend the message of Zarathustra, our prophet, for the experts who have spent years of linguistic study. It is therefore most commendable on the part of FEZANA and the Department of Near and Middle Eastern Civilization at the University of Toronto that funds were successfully generated to provide for an academic position to fulfill this need with the expertise required. I would like to close this by thanking once again the Faculty of Zoroastrian Studies to make this event possible. May the path of Asha reveal itself to us all. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jehan. I would now like to start introducing Jehan formally. But before I do that, I want to mention that our president of FEZANA, Arzan Samvadia, is unable to join us in this momentous occasion, as his flight from New York yesterday was canceled after sitting on the tarmac for 3 hours due to inclement weather and thunderstorms. He wishes all of you a very successful symposium and thanks Dr. Tavakoli for all the organization. Thank you, Arzan. Today, we gather to celebrate a remarkable individual, Ervad Dr. Jehan Bagli, who has left an indelible mark on the Zoroastrian world through his unwavering dedication to scholarship, science, and community. Jehan's life journey has been nothing short of extraordinary. Born into a world of possibilities, he chose a path of profound purpose and commitment. His life's work spans significant domains and have enriched our Zoroastrian society in countless ways. I am honored and privileged to have been asked to stand before you to introduce my most revered friend for 50 years since my arrival in Canada in 1973. My name, as I mentioned before, is Dolly Dastoor, an editor-in-chief of the FEZANA journal, and Dr. Jehan has been my go-to person for all questions related to the authenticity of statements made by any author for the journal. Now, something about his early life. Jehan was born in Mumbai in September 25, 1928, to Dhanmai and Feroz Bagli as the older of 2 children. He attended Sir J.J. B. Pitted Institution, popularly known as Cerny School, of what used to be called the Hornby Road in Bombay. Jehan was a very studious young man and with very strict upbringing. According to his good friend and brother, Rustam Katrak, whom he called his brother, he was a very intelligent boy, a quick learner who could outsmart any student his age even without trying. He attended St. Xavier's College in Bombay in 1951, obtained a BSc and a BSc Tech in Technology of Pharmaceuticals and Fine Chemicals. He was a recipient of the gold medal from the Indian Pharmaceutical Association. Jehan wanted to further studies abroad and suggested to his mother, who broke down and cried, as she did not want her only son to go away. After a lot of persuasion, his mother agreed, but was not sure how he would be able to afford it. Jehan applied and received the prestigious J.N. Tata Endowment Scholarship for 3 years, which enabled him to complete his doctorate in 1955 in medicinal chemistry from the University of London, England. Even though this was a gift scholarship, Jehan repaid it so that another student could benefit from it. He then went on to do his postdoctoral research at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore from 1955 to 1959. While in Baltimore, he received for 1955-57 the U.S. Public Health Service Fellowship from the U.S. National Institute of Health Fellowship for 1957 to 59. From 59 to 60, Jehan was a National Research Council of Canada Life at Laval University in Quebec. Now, something about his professional life. In Laval, Quebec, he interviewed for the position of Senior Research Scientist at the AS Research Labs in Montreal and joined the labs as Senior Scientist in 1965. This was the start of his love affair with Montreal, and I'm proud of that, for the next 23 years. Within 5 years of joining AS Research, he was promoted to group leader and then to senior research advisor in 1969 and to associate director of chemistry research in 1979. His rise in AS was phenomenal. In 1983, when AS Labs moved to Princeton, New Jersey, Jehan was among the 35 to 40 scientists selected to relocate to Princeton, New Jersey. In 1988, he was promoted to Associate Director of Exploratory Chemistry at Wyeth AS Researches, and 1995 promoted to Distinguished Research Fellow. For the first time in the history of that organization, such a position in chemical sciences was held by any person. A quote from the announcement of this position as Distinguished Research Fellow states, and I quote, "His synthetic creativity, coupled with his intuition in biological activity in chemistry of prostaglandin, has earned Dr. Bagli an international reputation. His sustained record of accomplishments was demonstrated by the discovery diprostazole and doxaprosod, both of which progressed to phase 1 clinical studies. Additionally, Dr. Bagli's exploration in the chemistry of tropopolines and heterocycles resulted in the discovery of C-levodopa, an anti-Parkinsonian agent, and perilonian and intratrophic agent, both of which reached phase 2 clinical studies, and end of quote. Dr. Bagli is recognized internationally for the research contributions in the area of prostaglandin. He has been involved as chair or co-chair for symposiums on that. He has been an invited lecturer in various universities around the world, including Iran, India, and the Netherlands. He is the author of several professional papers. In 1984, contributed a chapter on prostaglandins in the development of antihistaminic drugs, published by Butterworth and Company in 1984. Having an insatiable drive for research and development of new knowledge, he set an example to generate and motivate a new number of junior colleagues in Canada, mentoring new PhD students. In 1994, he was a recipient of the FEZANA Award for Excellence in Professional and Business. In 2017, on the 30th anniversary celebrations of FEZANA awarded him the Life Achievement Award, which recognizes a highly respected North American Zoroastrian who, through his personal achievements and meritorious services, has brought recognition to the Zoroastrian community worldwide. Jehan retired in 2018 at the age of 90 with over 60 publications and 49 US patents. Now a little bit about his married life, about his personal life. After a year in Baltimore, being single became boring and tiresome. So Jehan went to India in 1956 to search for a bride. Jehan's aunt lived in the same building as Freni, his future wife, and arranged for him to meet her. So Jehan, his parents, and his aunt all came down 2 floors to see the Freni, who was then the principal of a co-ed school in Mumbai. He approved at once, but she hesitated, until her brother and uncle met with Jehan and gave Freni their endorsement. The wedding was arranged, and then a few days later, they left for Baltimore on September 16, 2023. 7 days from now, Jehan and Freni will be celebrating their 67th wedding anniversary, so a very happy marriage to them. Congratulations. Their son Darius was born in January 1958 in Baltimore, and daughter Shiraz in May 1961 in Montreal. Jehan and Freni lived in Montreal from 68 to 83, and after spending 16 years in USA, returned to Canada in December 1999 to be close to their children in Toronto. Unfortunately, soon after their arrival, their beloved daughter Shiraz was diagnosed with cancer in August 2000, an illness she bore bravely. But Freni and Jehan, together with her husband Alistair and brother Dr. Darius, cared for her deeply till her death in July 2004. Jehan faced great sorrow and adversity in the loss of his young beloved daughter, but transformed his grief with a positive action to benefit humanity. Now a little about Jehan's trajectory as a priest. He began his priestly career as a navar, that is initiation into priesthood, with a morbid in Mumbai. At age 14, he was initiated at the Wadi Darimir in Navsari as a navar, and a year later as a martab at age 15. Jehan was fond of weightlifting and used to go to Rusti Kartrik's house in the morning to exercise. His father was not very happy about this. Once when Jehan was caned by his father for not learning his prayers properly, Jehan got so angry that he broke the cane, a little temper. Jehan is the first to admit that he did not know too much about the religion and was embarrassed when a fellow student in London asked him to explain his Zoroastrian religion. From that day on, he took it upon himself to study the religion in details. Thus began his lifelong quest for the understanding of the religion. He devoted much of his time and energy to understanding and disseminating the knowledge of the religion of Zarathustra and dialoguing at interfaith activities. He was elected the president of the North American Morbid's Council from 2002 to 2008. His contributions to the Zoroastrian community has been numerous. In 1968, he was elected the founding president of the Zoroastrian Association of Quebec, the first association in North America. From 1978, almost single-handedly, he published the first North American periodical, Gavashni, from Quebec, which had a wide readership in North America. He wrote well-researched articles on different topics of religion and issues. After the establishment of FEZANA in 1986, he was the first editor of FEZANA Journal for 2 years. From 2000, he was associated with FEZANA as a chair of the Research and Preservation Committee and was the coordinator of a very successful global scholastic competition for the World Zoroastrian Congress 2000 in Houston. Since 2001, he was the chairperson of the Zoroastrian Society of Ontario Lecture Committee, organizing interesting and exciting lecture series. In 2003, he was elected to the World Zoroastrian Organization International Board and served as their vice president from 2007 to 2010. In 2012, he established the World Zoroastrian Organization Canada chapter as a registered charity and served as its first president. Jehan played a very key role in the 3000th anniversary celebration of the Zoroastrian culture. He was instrumental in organizing the lecture series at the Royal Ontario Museum, the ROM, and was invited to the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. to make a presentation in the lecture series. He has represented ZSO at the Ontario Multi-Faith Council. He is a sought-after speaker for the North American Zoroastrian Congresses and at various anjumans in North America. He has authored articles and lectured on a variety of topics: duality, rituals, the calendar, priesthood, Jashan, Navjot, fire, universality, and Judaism as they relate to the Zarathustra religion. And together with Ervad Adi Unwala of New Jersey, he has written 4 books, a series of prayer books on understanding and practice of Jashans, Navjots, weddings, obsequies, and most recently, Nawa ceremonies, specially aimed at the younger generation of priests in the North American diaspora. He has presented at the Parliament of World Religions and demonstrated the Jashan ceremony, much to the admiration of participants to standing ovation, standing room only. He is committed to the cause of perpetuation of the Zoroastrian faith as a universal way of life on this continent and around the world. But his enduring passion is the unification of the Zarathustri calendar, for which he has made strong pleas across the Zarathustri world. He hopes, and we also hope, that one day it will be a reality. For the last 20 years, I rely on him at the beginning of each year for the FEZANA Journal to give me the correct dates, months, and years for the 3 calendars we Zoroastrians follow. After retirement, Jehan volunteered once a week at the Michael Carra Hospital, formerly the Toronto East General Hospital, and the Credit Valley Hospital in the emergency department. Despite his various accomplishments, Jehan does everything with the utmost humility and humor. His selfless dedication is an inspiration to all who know him. I would like to end with a quote from my son, Zubin, whom he trained to be a Nawa priest and later Martab, who went on to become a Martab. He writes, "Dearest Jehan uncle, you have been an enormous inspiration to me and I'm sure to many other Mobids. I can recall the many weeks of training, support, and assistance you provided me in the preparation for my Nawa initiation. For more than 40 years, you have been passionately dedicated to the religious education of our community. I can always count on you for your thorough, detailed, and clear explanations and guidance on all matters pertaining to Zoroastrianism. You have been a religious guide and mentor to me for the last 40 years and have been an incredible encyclopedia resource to the Zoroastrian world community. Your authored papers, lectures, recordings of prayers, and without doubt, your prayer books have not only benefited me, my children, and the community today, but they will live on to benefit generations. You have indeed left a legacy. Through your mighty voice, you have educated many within our small community and earned an honorary position that very few people can claim or even come close to claiming. You have not only left a mark within the Zoroastrian community, you have made a prodigious impact in advancing the knowledge and understanding of Zoroastrian globally. A man can be measured by his actions, a man can be measured by his words, and a man can be measured by his thoughts. Humata, hukta, hurashta. Jehan uncle, you not only emulate these words, you embody them. I cannot think of any other person with more powerful actions, words, and thoughts. I congratulate you on this Lifetime Achievement Award, respectfully submitted with much admiration, Zubin Dastoor. On this momentous date, let us not only celebrate the passing of time, but also the wisdom and experience that comes with it. Jehan, if you're listening, your journey has been an inspiration to us all. As you continue to inspire us with your grace and wisdom, we look forward to the continued blessings of your presence in our lives. Thank you for being you, a well-fulfilled life lived well. Wishing you good health and happiness always. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dastoor. If there is one or two questions, please. If not, we go to our next speaker, Dr. Jamsheed Choksy, who is Distinguished Professor of Central Eurasian and Iranian Studies at Indiana University, and he will be speaking on forgiveness and mercy in Zoroastrian societies. Very welcome.
Well, let me know if you can hear me or if you can't. Okay. Everyone can hear me fine, I hope. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Let me begin by saying bravo to Ervad Dr. Jehan Bagli for long being a stalwart leader of the Zoroastrian community on both sides of the border. And I say both sides because if I remember correctly, I think I first met Jehan, I think it was probably the fall of 1993. I had just come to the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, and Jehan and his wife so kindly invited my wife Carol and me over to their home for a meal. Jehan, I still remember that, and your precise instructions on where I should park. I still remember those as well, the great precision with which you wanted to make sure I was appropriately parked and wouldn't get towed. But thank you, it was a wonderful first meeting, and the service you have provided to the community, again, on both sides of the border, has been absolutely phenomenal. And therefore, my gratitude to the University of Toronto, to its Institute for Iranian Studies, for hosting this celebration of Jehan's career. And my congratulations on building such a fine institute. Most definitely, much needed. And to the community for finally, I'm going to say, endowing a position. I remember the discussions with the community when my old mentor Dick Fry was still around, and we were talking about this. So congratulations, I'm delighted. So today I want to talk to you a bit about the notions of forgiveness and mercy. I first wrote this up as a brief presentation in 2016 for the Mead Swing, a lecture at Oberlin College. And a longer version is now finally coming out in the Journal of the K.R. Kama Oriental Institute. So I just thought I'd summarize some of my thoughts here today in honor of Jehan. Herodotus, the 5th century BC Greek historian, observed of ancient Iranians, to quote, "It is their custom to deliberate upon the gravest matters when they are drunk. What they approve in their councils is proposed to them the next day when they are sober. And if being sober they still approve it, they act thereon. But if not, they cast it aside. If they take counsel upon a matter when sober, they decide upon it when drunk." Strabo, the Greek geographer and historian of the 1st century Common Era, commented on this practice too. They carry on their most important deliberations when drinking wine, and they regard decisions then made as more lasting than those made when they are sober. The image of making important decisions while under the influence of alcohol may sound strange. The ancient Iranians' intent, however, was to be able to act with balance, to consider and reconsider weighty decisions in multiple states of mind. Such an approach, it was believed, could lead to forgiveness or the showing of mercy through moderation. Moderation, Old Persian patima, Middle Persian paiman, also denoting the concept of the mean. So moderation of harsh judgments by avoiding both, to quote from the Denkard, from the third book of the Denkard, excess and deficiency. Indeed, according to a Middle Persian catechism known as the Dastoor Menogi Kerad, the Book of the Spirit of Wisdom, composed in the 9th or 10th century under Muslim rule from older Zoroastrian themes, and narrated as a discussion between the Spirit of Wisdom and a wise man, to quote, "Through moderate consumption of wine, goodness takes hold in the mind." The Pahlavi Denkard, or Acts of the Religion, codified by the High Magus Adurbadi Emedan in the 9th century and based on Sasanian theology, completed that notion that is goodness taking hold of the mind with the words, "Forgiveness is goodness." Abakshoyishan Vehi, Book 6 of the Denkard. The Gothic Avestan language in which the Zoroastrian scriptures were composed has the term Merejdika, Standard Avestan Marzdeka, mercy. It would be rendered into Middle Persian or the Pahlavi language of late antiquity and early Middle Ages as Amurzishan, and used to denote forgiveness as well, suggesting that forgiveness was intrinsic to the showing of mercy. Rendered in the Parthian language as Amujda and in the Sogdian language as Amurz, the word also conveyed the sense of compassion. The other Middle Persian term already mentioned, Abokshoishan, rendered in Parthian as Abokshishan, covered a range of meanings from forgiveness and mercy to pity. A third Middle Persian term, Vekshoishan, was employed for the related concept of forbearance. The act of pardoning was known as Hishtan, and a pardon was called a Hilishan, rendered as Hirzishan in the Parthian language. The act of asking or begging for forgiveness was known as Bosishan Goftan in Zoroastrian texts. These terms will be attested subsequently in the classical Persian vocabulary of Islamic era Iran due to religious, social, and the personal importance of forgiveness. Continuing his writings on ancient Iranian practices, Herodotus noted, "It is a praiseworthy law too, which does not allow even the king himself to slay any person for one offense, nor any other Persian to do incurable hurt to a subordinate for one offense. Not until reckoning shows that the offender's wrongful acts are greater and are more and greater than his services may a person give vent to anger." A balance in judgment, tempering justice with Amurzishan mercy and showing Vekshoishan forbearance, emerges as a trait of ancient Iranian society through the Greek historian's words. It appears that we have a Zand or commentary going on in the background as well. I was just joking. I just found it kind of amusing. These practices of measuring good and bad against each other can be traced back to Zoroastrian belief in the individual judgment of each mortal soul after death. According to Zoroastrian scripture and exegesis, Rashnu, the Yazata of justice, weighs each soul's good and bad deeds in the pans of a scale. If the soul's good deeds outweigh its misdeeds, the soul is escorted to heaven. If the soul's misdeeds outweigh its good ones, it falls into hell. If a soul's good and evil actions are equal, it is consigned to limbo until the end of time. Yet, Even the worst sinner is ultimately forgiven. At the end of time, after a final apocalypse and eschaton, every soul, even those who have suffered in hell after death, will be shown mercy by the Creator, resurrected into an earthly paradise and forgiven of all sins. In his Gatha, Zarathustra asked of his creator divinity, Ahura Mazda, "Where will there be recompense instead of sorrow? Where will there be mercy?" Kashatra Gatha Yasna 51:4. The notion of seeking mercy or forgiveness also shows up elsewhere in the Avesta, especially in the standard Avestan Yashts. A stanza in the Mir-Yasht portrays devotees pleading, "May he," that is Mitra, "come to us with mercy," rather than as the, to quote, punisher of wrongdoers. Similarly, each worshipper was expected to beseech of Ashi, Ard, the female Yazata of recompense, to quote, "Turn your mercy towards me." Another standard Avestan text, the Visparad, the prayers to all of the spiritual chiefs. This is essentially a collection of supplementary materials dedicated to Ahura Mazda as the chief and master of all creation. In this text, there's a praise to the act of listening to pleas and granting forgiveness. So the text reads, "We worship hearing and mercy, the mercy produced by appeals or through appeals." The Siroza, 30 days, dating from the 11th century of the Common Era, contains short invocations to 33 spiritual divinities individually. Also mentions mercy. The Nana or shorter Siroza states, "Praise for the holy mortal Kashayatvarya, for his molten metal, for his mercy, for his protection for the poor." The passage's Middle Persian Zand commentary also notes the same. The Moti or longer Siroza duplicates the previous line with minor variations in Avestan and Palvi texts. Kashayatvarya, Middle Persian Sharavar, is believed to have been created by Ahura Mazda to produce metals, and at the end of time, his molten metal will supposedly be used during the final purification of humans from their sins. And scripture and exegesis contain the theme that Kashayatvarya is involved in dispensing forgiveness for transgressions. The Agomadecha, we profess an Avestan dirge that was redacted by the 12th century of the Common Era, refers to mercy in the context of self-forgiveness. The text's unidentified compiler recorded the phrase, "Merciless indeed is one toward one's own mercy." The text's Pahlavi Zand, the Paur Zand, the Sanskrit and the Gujarati commentaries explain that passage as follows. "Merciless indeed is that one who has no mercy for his or her own soul." Yet, such high-minded words seemingly were paid scant attention by the Achaemenian king of kings, Darius I. Darius recorded repeatedly in his Old Persian royal inscriptions, to quote, "Then I cut off his nose and 2 ears and gouged out one of his eyes. He was kept bound at my palace gate where all the troops saw him. Then I impaled him." In one other passage, he refers to lopping off an offender's hazan, tongue as well. Darius justified lack of mercy and forgiveness, and even torture of political foes, by attributing their actions to drauga, drug, druz, confusion, badness, the lie, or evil par excellence. He justified his responses as keeping with arta, order, right, the truth. So Darius alleged, the lie became excessive in the land, and the lie made them rebellious. Even Herodotus knew of this Iranian claim, for he wrote, "They," referring to the Iranians and Persians, "hold lying to be the foulest of all." Darius, for one, claimed, "The man who works constructively, I reward according to his actions. He who does harm, I punish according to his offense." In other words, the King of Kings was suggesting he was upholding the divinely decreed dualistic system of good battling evil. In a sense, Darius can be regarded as perhaps drawing upon a canonical Iranian tradition in which Zarathustra was believed to have recited, "Then those two primordial spirits revealed themselves through a vision. They are the better and the worse in thoughts, words, and deeds. Between these two, may all of you choose wisely, not confusedly." Then when the two spirits initially came together, they created existence and non-existence. They determined how it will be at the end, the worst existence for the confused ones and the best residence for the righteous ones. Of the two spirits, the confused one chose to do the worst deeds. The holiest spirit, who was clad in the hardest of stones, chose order, as do those who please our Mazda through good deeds. Anavaita Gata 30. Just as our Master, the wise Lord or God, chose correctly to do good, and Angramanu, the angry spirit or devil, chose poorly to do evil, all humans too are expected to decide between right and wrong. Darius seems to have concluded that the rebels chose poorly. Their threat outweighed any benefit accrued from his dispensing mercy to them, and that he felt he was religiously vindicated in torturing and executing them to set a public example. Thus, mercy or forgiveness seems to have been considered an appropriate action only if and when it would serve as an instrument to further God's will and counter the devil's machinations. When extended under appropriate circumstances, Mir-Djalali could further, to quote, happiness for humanity, believed by Darius to have been created by our Mazda. However, texts such as the medieval encyclopedic Denkard warn, do not punish a person who warrants forgiveness. Wise words attributed to the renowned 4th century Zoroastrian magus Adurbadi Maraspandan also emphasize, to quote, one should not be overzealous in punishing others. Also, one ought not to seem to lack mercy. And finally, one must not smite another person in vengeance. Therefore, not only Achaemenian kings, but Sasanian ones too, would allege that the lie lay at the foot or root of strife and had to be countered with force. For example, Shapur I in the 3rd century had inscribed in a trilingual inscription, Caesar, namely referring to Marcus Julius Philippus, aka Philip the Arab. He wrote, Caesar lied again and did wrong. So we attacked the Roman Empire. On the other hand, much earlier, Artaxerxes I forgave his father's foe, namely Xerxes' foe, the Greek naval commander and politician Themistocles. Themistocles had led the Greeks to victory at the Battle of Salamis in October 480 of BCE, and had been hailed as a hero in his native city of Athens. But of course, Themistocles eventually fell out of favor of his fellow citizens and was ostracized either in the year 472 or 471 BCE. Then the Spartans demanded that he be tried by a Greek council for treason. So Themistocles, we are told, fled eastward, a flight that convinced even the Athenians of his guilt, and they deemed him a traitor. Eventually reaching Asia Minor, or modern-day Turkey, Themistocles sent a message to Artaxerxes, acknowledging that he had done the empire much harm, but rationalizing his actions as self-defense against invaders. stating, according to Greek sources, "I come prepared to receive the favor of one, namely Artaxerxes, who benevolently offers mercy." Themistocles requested from the King of Kings a year to learn the language and customs of the Persians, while pledging to serve the empire thereafter. Themistocles' family too fled Greece and joined him. Artaxerxes appointed Themistocles to the governorship of Magnesia, a Greek city in Ionia, and its surrounding region. Or so the story recorded by Plutarch in Parallel Lives says. But it's an important idea, the notion that even an opponent can come and request mercy and be shown it. Though mercy was often found from mortal superiors such as monarchs, divine forgiveness was and is regarded as far more important. A 9th century Common Era Zoroastrian catechism, the Chidaghandarzi Puryot Keshan, or Select Councils of the Ancient Sages, begins with a series of fundamental questions, including, from whom comes forgiveness and from whom comes mercilessness? The response follows later in the text through revelatory words ascribed to Ahura Mazda. Repent of the sins you have committed so that I, that is, Ahura Mazda, may forgive you. Indeed, for forgiveness and mercy to be extended, petit, penance, penitence, and pashamani, repentance, were deemed necessary. A passage in the Denkard Book 5 reads, "Atonement for sin and cleansing and purification from it, for mostly involves forgiveness, acceptance, and penitence." So along Pahlavi prayer, the Petit Pashamani serves as the standard liturgy of confession in Zoroastrianism. While discussing the faith of evildoers in the 9th century of the Common Era, the author of the Dadestani Denig, or Book of Religious Judgments, Manushchari Jovanjam, even cited an example of the mythical Iranian hero Jamsheed, seeking to quote mercy from the Creator after being led astray by evil. Likewise, the anonymous author of the Pahlavi Rivayat accompanying the Dadestani Denig, again probably written between the late 9th and early 10th centuries of the Common Era, claimed that the mythical hero Karsaspa, to quote, was penitent and therefore was granted mercy for his transgressions. Both those medieval writers were choosing well-known epic heroes as examples to stress the importance of seeking forgiveness and as a precursor to receiving mercy. Because his flock and he lived during the time when Iran was under Muslim rule of the Abbasid Caliphate, and Zoroastrians were steadily converting to Islam, Manushchir explained that even after acts of apostasy, a penitent individual who returned to the ancient Iranian faith would, to quote, obtain mercy and her soul will be saved. But Zoroastrian commentators also stressed that mercy had to be sought prior to death in order to avoid the tribulations of hell, according to the Pahlavi Rivayat accompanying the Dadestani Denig. The greatest and final dispensation of mercy and forgiveness is believed to come from the world creator. Manushchir, the high magus of Fars and Kerman, pointed out to lay readers that each sinner's soul, quote, takes up for himself or herself a request for mercy, that will be answered positively by Ahura Mazda, to quote, at the time of the final resurrection, Dadestani Denig, chapter 18. I thank you all, and most of all, I thank Jehan for his many, many years of service to the community. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dr. Ted Good from the Department of Near and Middle Eastern Civilizations, University of Toronto, and he's a recent PhD from here. He will be speaking on curiosity and personal identity in Denkard. Please. right?
Hi, my name is Ted, and I'm honored to be here. And today I will talk to you about curiosity and personal identity in the Dankard. This is the same book that Professor Choksy mentioned a few times. But instead of going straight into the Dankard, because it's a very difficult text, I want to start with this man. This is Manek Fardun Jikanga. He's a great scholar from a previous generation, and also one of the texts that Professor Choksy mentioned, the Chidag Andarzi Poyot Keshan. Kanga edited and translated this into English, and he had an introduction where he kind of compares it to other texts and talks about its importance. And one of the things he does is he finds a passage in the Chidag and compares it to other texts, and he says that it's the kernel of the Zoroastrian religion. It's a very important part. And so what is he doing? What is he comparing? Well, what he does is he compares a bunch of passages. I'm going to give a selection. So for example, Advorbadi Zardostan said that everyone must know these three things. Where am I from? Why am I here? And where shall I return? Another text that he cites, this one is attributed to Khosrow, the king of Iran, around the 6th century. He says, everyone must know, where have I come? Why am I here? To where must I return? And what do they want from me? And then just to clarify who these persons are. So the first was Advorbadi Zardostan. He's the grandson of Advorbadi Marspandan, who Professor Choksy also mentioned. The Dankard puts him in the very early 5th century, so possibly true, but hard to date these figures. And then Khosrow reigned Iran in the mid-6th century. And the text that Kanga was working on is the Chidag Andarzi Poyot Keshan. It takes those questions and it actually expands it to a set of 30. So it overlaps with some, but it includes many others. So these, based on what Kanga cites, he doesn't cite all of them. There's many more instances of these sort of questions of personal identity. We can see that these questions are all over the place in the Middle Persian literature. And they're all addressed to us. Who are we, right? But then we might wonder, why are these so important? They seem to be everywhere. They seem to be very to question who we are in a fundamental level. So Kanga didn't answer. This was a very short introduction to his text. So I'm going to leave what he did and kind of think through this. One possibility for why these questions are so important is there is an origin in the Gathas. So this is the Gathas in Humbach's translation. And if we look, we see, who are you? And we also see, whose are you? So two of the questions that were in the Chidag. But the context of these questions is important. The speaker of the verse says, somebody is coming to him with good thought and then asking these questions. And so I'm citing this because I want you to notice with good thought. So that's Bahumana. I'm pointing this out because the Dankard is going to use this. This is the immediately following stanza where we get the answers. So to the question, who are you? The speaker responds, I am Zarathustra. To the second question, whose are you? He responds, I'm allied with the Ashavans, not the followers of Elahé. This is sort of clear. Now the button's not working. Well, I can't go on. There we go. Okay. So now we can think, why is this passage important? This seems related to all the questions in the Middle Persian literature. And so we can say first, well, this is in the Gathas. It's the oldest, most important source. The other texts are obviously aware of this. But also, this is a very concrete event. The Gathas are very abstract and sort of philosophical, but this is very precise, like somebody talking to somebody else. And as we look at the Dankard, this event is actually going to be cut out and put into Zarathustra's life. And then in this biography of Zarathustra that comes in the Dankard, this will actually be interpreted as the very first time Zarathustra comes in contact with the divine being. So it's seen as an important event in the biography. So that's sort of the basic context, but I'm talking about the Dankard, so I should tell you a little bit about that. So this is a work from around the 9th century, so about a little more than 1,000 years ago. It's huge, it's got lots of content, but mostly philosophy and exegesis. Those are my two categories for it. So philosophically, we know that it engages ideas from Greece, India, and then contemporary Islamic ideas in the 9th century. And then exegetically, it's engaging with the Zand literature. So that's Middle Persian translations of Avestan texts, sometimes with glosses to tell us what confusing words are, sometimes with commentaries to explain the meaning, but engaging with the Avestan literature. So I'm saying philosophy and exegesis because those are the two things we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about Denkard Book 3, which is the most important source for Zoroastrian philosophy in this period, then also Denkard Book 7, which is the most detailed biography of the prophet. So we're going to talk about the Denkard. It's a book that's kind of old. It's important. It's not really translated into English. So this is something I'm working on. There's some other scholars in Europe who are working on this. Okay, so this is the topic, these questions. We're going to see it in the life of Zardusht, in the Middle Persian biography. We're also going to see some philosophical theories that are related to this, possibly why it's important to ask questions about personal identity and how it's related to curiosity in the Denkard. Yes, so here's our outline. I'm first going to talk about the biography of Zardusht. So this is Denkard Book 7. Then I'm going to use some philosophical theories to sort of think through this context, and then we'll have a short conclusion. So let's start with the biography of Zardusht. And just so we're clear, I'm saying Zardusht now because we're looking at Middle Persian sources, and we are no longer going to look at Avestan sources. So Denkard Book 7 is an important text, and in this text, the context of these questions, these identity questions from the Gathas, they come right after Zardusht has become ritually pure. Bahman, so that's the Middle Persian name for Vahumana, is the one who's going to ask the questions. That's why I pointed it out earlier. But then, so there are two major biographies of Zardusht in Middle Persian, and they both contain this in almost identical ways, but given the greater narrative of the whole biographies, they mean something different in the two biographies. So, what is the sort of general biography of the prophet? Well, it's in three parts. There's his early life, from his birth to what's called the consultation. Then there's the consultation. This is when Zarathustra, or Zardusht, meets Ormazd, gets the religion, sort of becomes a prophet, right? Gets the revelation. Then there's the aftermath, when he converts people, takes their religion, and goes to the world, famously converting Vishtas. So we have before the consultation itself, after. The question always appears in the first part, before the consultation. So there are three biographies in Middle Persian on Zardusht. One is Denkard Book 5, which is extremely short, and it doesn't have this event, so we're not going to talk about it. There's a much longer one in a book by Zoroastrian. He's the brother of Manushtir, which Professor Choksy mentioned several times. Then there's Denkard 7, which is the one we're going to focus on. So not only is Denkard 7 the most detailed, the longest, it has the most information, it's also the most heavily saturated with the Zand passages. Remember, these are translations from Avestan texts. One of the reasons that Denkard 7 is so important is that the Zand passages in Denkard 7 are of lost Avestan texts. So we don't have the originals, we can't compare, but how they are phrased, the sort of peculiarities of language, tell us that it is an old passage. And so because of this, we know that at least some of the content of Denkard 7 is very old. So here's the differences between Denkard 7 and Zoroastrian. Well, the differences that are important for today. In Denkard 7, these questions that we're going to look at are the first time Zardusht in any way comes in contact with a divine being. This is not the case in Zoroastrian, and so it's unique and makes the event more important in the Denkard. Zoroastrian, on the other hand, narrates the whole consultation. In Denkard 7, it's actually not there at all. It's referenced, but we don't see it. We're just told that it happens, and then we're told that it already happened. And so it's missing, or it's not talked about. So here's the 4 chapters in Denkard 7, which are the life of Zardusht. It comes in 2 halves: the early life, before the consultation, the later life, after the consultation. And so if we see, between chapters 3 and 4, that's where the consultation happens. It's not narrated in the text, and so we might wonder, well, maybe this is just a manuscript problem. But so these are the chapters, 2, 3, 4, 5. Chapter 1 is an introduction, which includes sort of an overview of the book. And that overview of the book matches what we have. So it's not obvious that something is missing. So there's our basic context. Let's look at the precise event itself. I'm going to start with something with a comic book, which shows the life of Zardusht. You don't have to read the text. That's not from Denkard 7, but it'll give us the idea of what's happening. So Zardusht comes to a river. He goes into the river, and when he comes out, Bahman is there, and that's when our event takes place. So that's the context, and now we're going to look at Denkard 7. So how Denkard 7 does this, how it introduces events for which it's going to give lots of Zand, is it has an introductory section. So this is a non-Zand Middle Persian, and it tells us during the 30th year of Zardusht, Bahman approached him as Ormaz's messenger. And it gives us the context, and then it says, okay, now I'm going to give you the Zand passages. And so after this, there's pages and pages of like detailed Zand commentaries and whatever. So we're just going to go right to the point. So Zardusht has just entered the 3rd branch of the river. And then right when he comes up, he sees a man in the distance walking towards him from the south. The south is an auspicious direction, but we don't know who it is. It's too far away. Then there's a 4th branch of the river. Zardusht goes in, comes out, and that's when Bahman is right there, right? Just like in the comic book. And so the very first thing that Bahman says to Zardusht, so the very first thing that a divine being says to Zardusht is, who are you? And he says, I am Zardusht. And then he says, from whom are you? This question is a little bit different than in the Gathas, because in the Gathas it was a question of allegiance, which side are you on? And here it's a question of lineage. So he responds, I am from Spitama, this is my lineage. And then you can see at the bottom, I have these square brackets with some questions, or with some dots. After this, Bahman continues to ask questions. You know, things like, what are you striving for? And Zardusht says, righteousness. What are you doing this? What are you doing that? But what's interesting is it's only questions. Bahman doesn't speak, he only asks questions. And so what is the importance of this, especially in the Denkard? Well, like I said multiple times, this is the very first time Zardusht has made contact with the divine being. The consultation is not described in this text, and so this becomes the longest, most detailed section where Zardusht is talking to a divine being, which makes it even stranger that Bahman reveals no knowledge to him. So there's no part of the narrative where Zardusht gets the religion and becomes a prophet, which is kind of strange. So if we think about this in terms of comparative religion, usually what happens when we have a prophet, we have God sending a messenger to the prophet, giving some information to the prophet takes it to the people. Maybe it's something like, God wants the people to do X, or here's some sacred truth that the people didn't have access to, or here's a sacred scripture. Remember, Bahman is just asking questions. He doesn't give him anything. So that's kind of a strange thing. It made me curious, and so now I want to look at some philosophical theories in the Denkard, which are somehow related to this. So this is not a direct answer to those questions, because it's a complex text. We don't know how the Denkard was composed. But let's remember what we're talking about, what our problem is. So why did Bahman reveal no knowledge to Zardusht? And why did he just ask questions, right? He's asking questions, so the knowledge is coming from Zardusht to Bahman. Well, in Denkard 3, it has the theory that God's will is innate in people, so Bahman didn't have to reveal it, it was already there. And the religion itself, Zoroastrianism, is innate to people. So he didn't have to give him any sacred truth, he didn't have to give him any text, he was innate in the person. Maybe he just had to sort of ask the right questions to evoke it. That's already latent in the person. Now let's look at some passages where this is discussed. So this is Dankar 3, chapter 294, you can see on the bottom. And we see that Orma's will is that people know him. And we know this for two reasons. The first is that every person has this psychological faculty which allows them to cognize the creator. So it's it's built into us. And the religion itself tells us we should do this. So we're told to do this, we have the ability to do this, it seems to work out really well. So this is God's will. What about people's will? Well, people just naturally want to cognize the creator. They have this capacity and they can do it. But what's interesting is people also want to learn other things. They want to know the creator, but also things that are not the creator. So people, and then the chapter has this passage from the ancients. These are the first teachers of the religion, the Poryot Keshan, from the Chidagi Andarzi Poryot Keshan. So what do they say? They said the creator of innate wisdom is the name of this faculty, recommends that people be diligent in learning. So Ormaz is the creator of innate wisdom, and he says people should be curious. So we see that people have this innate, open-ended curiosity, and it sort of functions through this faculty, which is innate wisdom, which is the ability to cognize the creator, but it also has the ability to learn other things. This is innate wisdom. It's Asin Khrad in Middle Persian, and it is a direct borrowing from Avestan. You can just see it's almost the same letters. It is one of the most important, psychological, spiritual parts of the human being, and it's also one of the most widely discussed in the Dankard, which means I can show you more quotes. So for example, innate wisdom is the greatest messenger. So Ashtag, this is the same word that Bahman was described as, the greatest messenger that the creator sent to people. And it is through innate wisdom that people cognize the creator. So this is the same stuff we saw in the other chapter. You can see this is a different chapter. And so not only do we cognize things, so information comes in, but because we have this wisdom innate to us, when we speak, when information comes out of us, whatever we say is derived from the Zoroastrian religion. And this is because the religion is actually innate. So Osnig, it's the same word as innate wisdom. It's innate to the nature of people. So people were created with the religion inside of them. So innate wisdom, it was created in people, it's innate to us, it's part of our physical or psychological constitution. We use it to cognize correctly, so get information in, and we speak with it, so get information out. But then there's this chapter which just makes it very concrete. The good religion, Zoroastrianism, just is innate wisdom. And innate wisdom is born via Bahman. So we see that there's this outside instigator, maybe, which generates it. So that means we have innate religion. It was created into people, the creator of innate wisdom, the creator Ormazd, and it manifests. So I can see it in other people because they're curious. That's because it's the functioning of this faculty. So maybe Vahman didn't have to give any information because he just had to, or all he had to do was ask the right questions to sort of stimulate the curiosity. So let's maybe have a brief conclusion. We'll just summarize, the two parts. So first we had these identity questions, which began all the way in the Gathas, so at the very beginning. Then, in the biography of Zarathusht, we saw it in a very important segment of his life. And then in the greater Middle Persian literature, they were expanded, not only in the number of questions, but in the number of texts. It was all over the place. And then I talked about the philosophers. This is the Dankar 3. I said they engaged with ideas from Greece and India and contemporary Islamic ideas. And they used these ideas to sort of think through the religion, develop a philosophical theory which was adequate to the Avestan worldview. Now I just want to point out some things that they were doing, the Zoroastrian philosophers, related to what we just talked about. So we saw that the Zoroastrians had Asin Khrad, this is innate wisdom, transparently from the Avesta. So these authors were in the 9th century. Contemporary with them, there were Islamic theologians who had the same idea, that Islam was innate. They called it fitra, it's the Arabic word. But then during the Sasanian period, or contemporary with the early Sasanian period, there was a philosopher in India named Bhatrahari, who has this idea that Brahman, the sort of divine supreme reality, is just language. And he sort of was like a, pre-Chomskyan, we are born with language. So we have this stuff innate in us as well. And we know Bhatrahari, there's evidence of Bhatrahari coming into the Denkard. And then we have the same idea in Greece with Plato's theory of recollection. This one's particularly interesting, so I'm just gonna have one more little slide. So Plato had this idea that there are these forms, right? The form of the good, form of the beautiful, and he said these were innate in people. Specifically, he said our souls are always in a state of already having learned them. And the way he demonstrates this is in a dialogue called the Phaedo, where Socrates shows that a slave boy, meaning someone who is not educated at all, knows advanced geometry. And Socrates demonstrates this by asking him the right questions, and he extracts geometry. So that seemed like an interesting comparison, something I'm working on. Thank you.
So thank you, Professor Tavakoli. So he argues that that if we put Prophet Zoroaster academically in the 1700 to 1200 BCE period, then we are actually putting him in the context of the migrations that were taking place. And these migrations were also taking place to Greece. We're talking about, say, again, 1400, say, something BCE. And that the context in which the prophet appears and enunciates the gathas is very similar to the context of the Greek philosophers actually philosophizing in the same what do you say, I say, what do you say, I say kind of context. Yeah. So I will talk to you later about this, and you can access it. And I think it will put this whole question of the context in a broader perspective, if you will, and it will help a lot. My question, I hope that it will. My question is, if again we put the Prophet Zoroaster in that context, Vahuman is also, as you know, an avatar of Mithra. Bahman, yeah, okay. Is an avatar of Mithra, and it is Mithra that gives, that is under the waters and gives divine glory and whatnot. So it is very, very interesting to me, at least, to see whether or not we can put this in that ancient context, right? Where there are still yazatas, many yazatas, each functioning in different formats. And it is one of these yazatas that actually comes and brings out the innate wisdom out of Zoroaster. And that's my...
Thank you. I'll have to get the information about the other presentation and some of these other ideas. So, my talk was mostly for Islamic period stuff, so it's not exactly in that context, but there is the Zand passages in Denkard 7, which these are lost Zand, or lost Avestan originals. So those were, we don't know when these lost passages were from, what context they were written in, but it's possible they were in sort of a similar context. But this is hard to make solid claims about because we don't have the information. Basically, the most we can say is that the language as it appears in a 9th century text is much older than it seems, and it's characteristic of texts that we have the Avestan original, and we can say, oh, this is the way they translated Avestan text. So this seems like it's at least as old. Maybe it's older, maybe it's not as old, we can't really say sure. We can say this seems like a Zand passage. So I don't know about the ancient context. I mean, there's a lot of things that are possible, but yeah, thank you. I can't hear you. No.
Okay, I'll try to shout. Great presentation, thank you very much, Todd. If you go back to the first slide, oh, okay, it's here now. The first or second, the questions
Okay.
that are very intriguing to someone who is not very familiar with Zoroastrianism. There is a question about what do they want from me? And I found it very curious. I mean, why it's what does he want from me? It's what do they want from me? I wondered if you have any thoughts on that, but also around the question. I mean, I guess Zoroastrianism is all about answering that question. But if you can elaborate as well on that, I'll be grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry I couldn't put it up. I guess this is the passage from the text attributed to Khosrow, the king of Iran, where he says, where am I from? Where am I going? Why am I here? And then he has the other one, which was not in the one before it, which is what do they want from me? And so the plural, what do they want from me? It's not specified. In the previous question, we don't have like an object that carries down. So what it might be is possibly like Yazdas, Yazdan, which are usually in the plural. Like what am I supposed to do to, appease the gods, or how am I supposed to do sacrifices and such? They're actually, so just like in the Chidag, which Professor Choksy talked about, the Chidag has 30 questions and then it has answers. So just like that, in the text that I quoted, there are answers, which are different given the context. Like Adurbad the priest responds differently than Khosrow the king. I did not put them in the slide because I wanted to stay focused and I only have 20 minutes, so I cut everything. But so my intuition is that it's probably the gods. Yazdan, here we go. Oops. Yeah. So we can see that the first three questions are almost the same. I don't remember if the wording is actually the same, but the content seems very similar. And then in the Chidag, there's overlap, but then there's the standard one from, or not, the original one from the Gathas, who are you? And whose are you? Those are the first two questions in the Chidag, and then it has 20 something more. In all the places where these questions appear, they sort of orbit a similar topic, but not all of them agree. The sort of epicenter is the Chidag, which has the 30, and so everything sort of agrees with that. And yeah, I hope that was answering it. Kind of trailed off there at the end, sorry.
Why was there evil with God, good, okay, the two. Why not only good?
So the way that that Denkard 3 responds to this, which is the philosophical text, is it says they are two separate things. They're unified in us because we live in the mixed world. So there are good things in the world and there are bad things in the world, and they come from two different sources. The good things come from Ormazd. I'm using the Middle Persian because we're in Middle Persian texts. The bad things in the world come from Adiman. And so according to the Middle Persian philosophers, theologians, it is not Ormazd's responsibility that there's evil in the world, but also he is actively pushing it out of the world. And that is the world, that is history. The history will end when evil has been pushed out, been removed. But you mentioned that Spentamaino, that's actually in one of the quotes that I gave, I just didn't highlight it, where it says, innate wisdom is born from Rahman. It also says, and Spenag Menoi, which is the Middle Persian form of Spentamaino. Too many slides, I'm sorry. Yes, okay, so if you see at the bottom, innate wisdom is born of Fahman and the benefiting spirit. So that's Spanagmenoi. So they're both sort of involved. But according to the theology in the Denkard, in Denkard 3, Ganagmenoi, which is the other spirit, is not from Ormazd. It's from a separate autonomous source.
Thank you for your presentation. I was intrigued by your views about the way that the Greeks, the Indians, and everyone else were. There was a kind of a joining of different philosophies. Years ago, when I took a course in Zoroastrianism, I recall my professor Oxtoby at the time talked about the Aristotle's doctrine of the golden mean, and in Zoroastrianism there is a doctrine of moderation, not excess, not deficiency, and at that time it was still some subject of scholarly debate as to which came first, how much one philosophy influenced the other. So I'm just wondering, what's the latest on that subject? If you have any views on that?
Yeah. That's a good question, because that's more exactly what I do, which is the philosophical stuff and sort of how it all relates. Because we have the Denkard, which is in a language that's from late Sasanian, early Islamic times. So that's a millennia after Aristotle. But we know that these things are older. There's oral history. We know that there was sort of lots of contact between the Greeks and the Persians. And so possibly we just have late evidence from Iran, but the earlier influence is evident. For example, there's a lost work of Aristotle that's called On the Magi, where he talks about Zoroastrians and he gives the basic cosmology. It's quoted in some later sources. And so we know Aristotle's aware of this. And Plato talks about it somewhere, talks about the Zoroastrians. But so that's the basic problem. We have a late text in Middle Persian, which as a language is later than Aristotle. And so we're like, what is the relationship? What's the temporal relationship? My intuition is that the Denkard, the text we have, is as a whole later than Aristotle. That doesn't mean that there were earlier sources, which are probably lost, which were engaging with Aristotle. But because we don't have those sources, we can't see, for example, how Zoroastrian theologians changed over time. Maybe how they responded to it initially, but then changed their mind after a couple hundred years, how academic ideas change. We can't see any of that history. We just have this sort of big book, which is very difficult and from roughly a couple hundred years. For the other figures, it's much easier to sort of pin down the Islamic theologians because they're around the same time as the authors of Denkard 3. So we have names for the people who are the editors. So Professor Choksy mentioned Adurbadi Emedan. He's probably from the late 9th, maybe early 10th, or that's when he dies. There's an earlier editor named Adur Ferobay, who's probably from the late 8th, early 9th, so they're about 100 years apart. And so we have these like bookends of this 100 years, and we can put sort of Islamic figures there. We can say like, oh, well, we know from Arabic sources that Aristotle's Metaphysics was translated into Arabic at such and such time, which is between our window of these two figures. So we can know that it's possible that they could have gotten it from the Arabic sources. But there's a big problem or a big question about this translation from Greek and also Sanskrit and various other languages into Arabic, because the things that are translated are kind of strange. So first we have things like engineering, medicine, agriculture, very practical, makes sense. You can see why they would translate this. Then we have extremely abstract books like Aristotle's Metaphysics, which in no way is relevant to anything anybody's doing with their daily life. And so a scholarly question is, why did they translate Aristotle's Metaphysics and various other books of Aristotle? One theory is that it's based on, so that there's a famous book written about this. It's called Greek Thought, Arabic Culture by Dimitri Gutas. And he says this started in Sasanian Iran. And he quotes from the Denkard and says that the late Sasanian kings, for example, Khosrow, had this idea that they wanted to translate everything into Middle Persian and kind of compare it to the Avesta, because the Avesta was the source of all texts. So there's this sort of literary trope in Middle Persian sources that the Avesta was destroyed and shattered, sort of spread out, then it was brought back together, then it was shattered, then it was brought back together, and that same idea is used to describe the Denkard itself. So the very last chapter of Denkard Book 3, we have that same pattern. The Denkard was broken into pieces, then so-and-so put it back together, then it was broken into pieces, someone came along, put it back together. And so scholars of Islamic studies connect those narratives to the translation movement. But the idea that, we would have to know, why would late Sasanian people want to do this? They have the same idea, they have the same context. They would obviously want to translate practical things, but then we have the question, why would they do philosophical things? And so one of the things that I'm like, this is my theory, this is not out there, is that I think it's related to like curiosity. So there's another chapter in Denkard 3, which was not on the slides, where it talks about knowledge versus ignorance. And it says knowledge is just composed of light and ignorance is composed of darkness. And so when we as people learn something, when we know something, the object becomes more light. And so going into the whole cosmic idea, how history is sort of analyzed in the Denkard, once all the good in the world once good suffuses the world and pushes out all the darkness, then like the renovation will happen. And so one of the ideas is that, being curious and like learning everything will make the world a better place. And so it seems like there's a philosophical reason why it would happen in Sasanian Iran, which would just carry into the early Islamic period. And so possibly it was translated into like Aristotle was translated in that time, because we have a lot of Greek philosophers who came over, and we know they brought these texts, but we don't have intermediary translations from the Greek, from the Sasanian period and in the Arabic. But there's a lot of evidence. Sorry, I kind of rambled off because this is things I'm interested in. So I can talk to you more about this after.
Thank you, Dr. Good. One more question.
Yeah, a quick question. Thank you for a very fine presentation. You mentioned the influence of the Greeks, the Indians, and Islamic ideas in the Denkard. I can understand the Greeks and the Indians going back to the Indo-Aryan, Indo-Iranian start of the religion. I have a little bit of difficulty with the Islamic part of it. And can you please summarize in timelines as to when and how the Islamic ideas may have come into the Denkard? Because I thought that it preceded Islam. So how did that come about?
That's a good question. Okay, so the Denkard was composed over many years. So some of it is pre-Islamic, and some of it was composed during the Islamic period. What I work on most is Denkard 3. So what happens in Denkard 3 is a lot of chapters. Like what I gave you is the body of the chapter. It'll say something, and then sometimes at the end it will say, but other people disagree and they think this, and they're wrong for this reason. So in those passages, when they attack another belief, they don't say who they are, but sometimes we can say, this is like a Muslim sect who believes X, Y, and Z, and this is a Zoroastrian argument against it, using this theory they talked about in the chapter. So it's unclear what came in, like what influence came in, but we know that they were aware of them and they were responding to them, they were refuting theories by the other theologians, by the Islamic theologians. Yeah.
Dr. Good is a recent PhD from University of Toronto, trained by our Zoroastrian studies scholars. Our next speaker is Professor Parvaneh Pourshariati of City University of New York and New York City College of Technology, and she will be speaking on the Mazdakites, the Mitraists, and the later Khurramdin's accusations and realities. Professor Pourshariati. Please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming here and being here. I would like to start by thanking Professor Mohamad Tavakoli for his gracious invitation. I would like to also thank the other institutions and foundations who have been supporting this gathering, including the Elahé Omidyar Institute of Iranian Studies, and also various Zoroastrian foundations who have graciously sponsored and supported Professor Tavakoli's activities throughout the years. I would like to say hello to Dr. Jehan Bagli, and I hope all is fine with you. We are missing you here, but I hope you enjoy my talk as well. So without further ado, I will be reading from my text, and I'll be talking about the Mazdakites and the Mithraists. The Mazdakite uprising has been the topic of much research and interest through the past century at least. The literature is so elaborate that one cannot properly address these here. So what follows is yet another perspective viewing the so-called communist revolution of the Mazdakites from the prism of the historical events that engulfed Sasanian kings and Parthian dynastic families during the first rule of the Sasanian king Ervad, that is from 488 to 496. So, as we have extensively argued elsewhere, this is a little self-promotion. As we have argued extensively elsewhere, the Parthian dynastic families were major forces in the Sasanian Empire. Forces that quite often actually decided the succession of the kings. Having their lands in the four corners of Iran, especially from northeast to the northwest, they included these families, these Parthian families during the Sasanian period, included the Espahodan, the Kanarangian, along with the Karans, the Mehrans, and the Surens. All can be charged with being intimately involved in Sasanian kingship. These are the lands in which these various Parthian families are thought to have lived during the Sasanian period. I shall be arguing here today that the Mazdakite uprising was in fact an Ayyar Mithraist movement that was unleashed by the dynastic forces of the Parthian Mehran family, especially the dynastic figure of Shapur Razi, against the suffocating hold that the forces of the Parthian dynasty, Karanids, had on Sasanian crown. For the rule of Kavad in particular, we are dealing with two major dynastic figures in the entourage of the king. Sohra, the Karanid, and Shapur Razi, the Mehranid. In the last decades of the 6th century, droughts had come to decimate the land. Vegetation, cattle, people alike. Earthquakes had erupted in Iran and the rest of Western Asia. This is at the last decades of 5th century. For the population of Sasanian Empire, as for the Eastern Romans, these were woeful times. Among other matters, drought had led to migration movements, not only towards the Sasanian Empire, but towards Byzantium as well. The Germanic migrations, and those are the ones that are reflected in that in my right-hand side map. The Germanic migration had created havoc for what had been the Western Roman Empire in 476, and for what was to become, shortly thereafter, the Eastern Roman Empire, i.e. Byzantium. In the Sasanian Empire, with the Hephthalites, the Kidarites, and other Eastern Iranian people gathering on the northeastern borders of the empire, wars had been in full swing. A formidable coalition of dynasts, most among whom was the Parthian Mehranids, had brought the Sasanian king Piruz, the father of King Avad, to power in 459 to begin with. Piruz, the father of Avad, however, had lost his life in what the sources depict as his last foolhardy war against the Hephthalites. His family and treasury and his young son Avad having fallen hostage into the hands of the enemy. In 484-488, therefore, it is the Parthian Karanid Sokhra who puts Valash in power, and in what the sources portray as a heroic feat, Sokhra gathers a strong army, this is important, from among the other Parthian houses and nobility, and sets out against the Hephthalites. This he does and rescues the king's family, including his younger son Avad, and retrieves the royal treasury. Once back in Tisfun, Sokhra deposes Valash, arguing that he does not know the ways of kingship. Subsequently, Sokhra puts the young Kavad on the throne in 488. During the first part of Kavad's rule, that is from 488 to 496, really the last decade of the 5th century, whatever action one attributes to royal decrees or royal activity of Kavad should in fact be attributed to the Parthian Karanid Sokhra, his family, and his dynasty. All our foreign and native sources, including the Khodai-Namak traditions in Arabic or in Persian, testify to this and go into the details of the Karan's power. I beg you to bear with me as I articulate the political dimensions of the Mazdakite uprising. Given the very favorable depiction of Sokhra during this period of House Sasan's rule, one can justifiably argue that the Karens were responsible, in fact, for composing this part of the Khodai-Name tradition in which the Karens and Sokhra get the best representation of all. Sokhra here becomes the hero responsible for restoring the Sasanian kingship. Tabari informs us that all the other grandees of the empire are at Sokhra's command. All the affairs of the country are under his control. It was as if Avad was not the king. People came to Sokhra and for all their affairs, treating Avad as a person of no importance and regarding his commands with contempt. Through war, booty, and taxation, the Karens amassed substantial more wealth in their treasuries. They had, in fact, the royal treasury of the Sasanians under their control. Now, Ferdowsi, among other sources, informs us that 5 years into the kingship of Sokhra, the young Kavad becomes astute and of age. Those privy to the king ask him, why this complacency? The young Kavad replies that, and this is very important, Kavad replies that he does not possess an army or a commander-in-chief, Razbkha for that matter, with which to confront the forces of Sokhra. The Sasanian king had no army of its own. He is then reminded, however, the Sasanian king, that is Kavod, is reminded then that he does in fact still possess royal subjects, loyal subjects, who are actually royal also, loyal subjects who are powerful and have a strong army at their disposal, who are powerful and have a strong army at their disposal, who will happily aid him. Who were these loyal subjects of the king? Well, these were yet another powerful Parthian house, House Mehran of Rey, under the command of Shapur Razi. I argue in my previous work that the Mehrans are, in fact, as their name, the theophoric name, just substantiates, they are actually Mehr worshippers and Mitra worshippers. Dinavari clearly identifies in this Shapur Razi as one of the sons of the great Mehrans, and Kavod's governor over Khutraniye and Babylonia, both in Mesopotamia. Tabari identifies Shapur Razi as the supreme commander of the land, Espahbad al-Bolad, as does Ferdowsi in his long narrative. That Shapur Razi asked to come to the king with the troops under his command, as the king had no army to speak of. It is crucial to underline the significant fact that Kavod had no army of his own. Ferdowsi leaves us no doubt that in his recall of Shapur Razi, Kavod was in fact relying on one of the staunchest enemies of Khosrow. So here is a sort of a rivalry between the House Mehran, two Parthian houses, one House Mehran and one House Karen. House Karen having total control over the young Sasanian king Kavod during the first part of his reign, at which point enters Shapur Razi. So together with his army, Shapur Razi is said to have collected that of the armies of other discontented nobles. So in other words, Sokhra Karen has also control over the armies of the Sasanian kings and sets out against Sokhra to Shiraz. Of course, here it is anachronistically Shiraz. Sokhra is then defeated, captured, and brought back to Ctesiphon together with his treasury. It is at this point, I argue, that the Mazdakite uprising is unleashed. And it is Shapur Razi who unleashes this so-called Mazdakite uprising. In what follows, I shall propose to you that it is in the dynastic rivalry of the Mehrans on behalf of Kavod against the Karanid Sokhra that we must seek the origins of the Mazdakite uprising. I also submit to you that the Mazdakite uprising was the unleashing of an Ayyar Mithraist uprising by Shapur Mehran. The Ayyars, I argue, were in turn chivalrous Mithraic brother and sisterhoods. We can conveniently pinpoint the unleashing of the Mazdakite revolt to 5 years after the Kavod's assumption of power in 488. The rebellion certainly continued into the rule of Khosrow I in the 530s, in later centuries appearing appropriately, as we shall see, as the Khorramdins. Two issues have particularly been vexing to scholarship. Around these issues, a consensus has been formed. To begin with, it is agreed by scholarly consensus that the Mazdakite uprising was the first communist movement in world history. At the heart of the issue, we are told, was the redistribution of the wealth and the property in a just manner in the face of injustices committed by the nobility, in this instance, including the Parthian Kharanid dynasty. This ostensible communism of the Mazdakites is supposed to have acted as a casus belli, casus belli, or casus belli, for the revolt, an uprising against a vague class of the so-called nobility, according to other scholarly consensus. The late antique and medieval detractors of the Mazdakites also accused them of a second practice, namely ibah al-nisa, sharing of wives. So much so that as a result of the matrimony of the Mazdakites with the wives of the nobility, a lesser class of bastard class of nobility is said to have been created on the heels of the Mazdakite uprisings. There are other aspects of the nature of the Mazdakites on which there has been a consensus. Choksy articulates these best based on a passage from Ibn Qutaybeh. Ibn Qutaybeh says the following about the Mazdakites. And they said that God has given and they said that God has given the riches of the world to be shared equally by the worshippers. But the people did wrong to each other, and some appropriated the property of others. And we divide them among the people, the Mazdakites are supposed to have been saying among the people, and return to the poor what is theirs by right from the property of the rich. And they began, Ibn Qutaybeh says, to take possession of and lay hands on the house, women, property of the people. Significantly, there is one unique tradition provided by Ibn Qutaybeh also, where he identifies Sokhra and the Karens as the main target of the Mazdakite uprising. There is a second fact that Choksy observed vis-a-vis the Mazdakite uprising. He argued that in the letter of Tansar, that is a letter that is ostensibly written by Ardeshir, the first Sasanian king, Kings Mobad, to the rulers of Tabaristan, but in fact was basically, it's a letter which basically belongs to the 6th century, i.e. shortly after the Mazdakite uprising. So Choksy argues that, correctly, that the term used for the Mazdakites in the letter of Tansar is ayyars. Unfortunately, Choksy did not pursue this fascinating observation. It is my contention here that the observation of Choksy in fact perfectly depicts the nature of the Mazdakite movement, namely that a substantial part of the army unleashed by Shapur Mehran was actually an ayyar army. Elsewhere, I have argued that ayyars were in fact Mithraic societies. Secret societies that, unlike their Roman counterparts, admitted women in their midst. They lived communally with women in their midst. They were part of the secret Mithraic brotherhoods and sisterhoods with a set of praxis that closely replicated the praxis of the Mazdakite revolutionaries. Unlike the Roman Mithraists, Unlike the Roman Mithraists, who formed secret societies and gathered in Mithraic temples that have left substantial archaeological relics, namely temples at the end of which stood the scenes of Tauroctony. And here we see a depiction of Tauroctony where the Roman Mithras is actually slaying a bull, and from the life that is created from that, various animals, including a dog and a serpent and another animal that has claws, I forget, eating from the blood of the sacrificial blood of the bull. But the remains of the mass of temples that were built where the Roman armies went, from the 1st to the 3rd centuries, have one shortcoming. They defy understanding. It is here, I argue, as I did a few years ago at the University of Toronto at the invitation of my dear colleague, that Iranian Mithraists have left for us, in fact, an immense treasure for posterity, a holy grail that not only explains the nature of Roman Mithraism perfectly, and you must know that here we are dealing with the ideology wherein the Greeks and the Romans have been the best that the world has had to offer, to history. We are coming from that mentality that argues that Roman Mithraism has nothing to do with Iranian Mithraism. I argue that in the 2nd century, epic 2nd century CE, epic of Samak Ayyar, which is a multi-volume epic where the praxis and ideology of the Ayyars are reflected, which can explain Roman Mithraism in turn, we can find the answer of who were these Mithraists and what was their praxis actually. Being the account of a mystery cult where secrecy was one of the tenets of these societies, we have only 2 copies of this epic extant, one in Persian and one in Turkish. The very ethos of Mithraeus Ayyars and their conception of worldly existence is summed up in this epic. One of the Ayyars of the epic, for example, namely Sorkh Kafar, the red apostate of the epic, says the following: Armanshah has no brain. Now, this is from the 2nd century sort of text, and we have to compare it with Ibn Qutaybah, who is a 9th, 10th century author writing about the Mazdakites. So the Parthian text tells us, Armanshah has no brain. He does not know that the very foundation of the world was set thus. No one brings riches into the world once given birth by a mother. All is procured through positions. It is usurped, stolen, dispersed, and devoured until one is made king through the resources of the people. Here, the epic of Samak mimics the depictions of the Mazdakite previously given by Ibn Qutaybah. The Ayyar women in Samak Ayyar make temporary marriage, sighe khahar o baradari with their male counterparts. In other words, they make temporary marriages so that they become not so-called haram in the Islamic depiction of it to each other, right? So the preconditions for chastity, therefore, is in this way assured for the Ayyar women. به گواهی یزدان مرا به برادری خود قبول کن. The Ayyari Mithrais lived a communal life, all right. They lived in communities where women and men cohabited, having declared oaths of celibacy, practicing the tenets of their mysteries. They swore to Nur or Nar or Mer, and they drank wine to the happiness of one another. Shadi khorde kasi shodan was to make a bond to that person. To drink to the happiness of someone means to be under their patronage, so to speak. Okay. These associations were secret associations with underground lives as detailed in the letter of Tansar, the Mobad, to Jusnas, the ruler of Tabaristan, where before entering the Mithraic associations, one had to pledge that they did not divulge the secrets of Raz, of their beliefs. سوگند بخور که راز من آشکارا نکنی و مرا در نسپاری و با دوست من دوست باشی و با دشمن من دشمن باشی. Pledge that you will keep my secret and you will not divulge it and you will be my friend and my friend, the friend of my friend and the enemy of my enemy. Shaki noticed this and declared that although our text evinces their batiniye principle, they do not expressly mention the term esoteric. And this passage, which I will ignore, has to do with the fact that, again, that keeping secrets, like Roman Mithraic associations, so too in Iranian Mithraic associations, keeping secrets are a must. So yes, to conclude, no, it is not yet to conclude. I have a little bit more to go. 5 more minutes? We have already done 5 more minutes on top of that? Thank you. Okay, so I will just go over this. As I mentioned already, wine takes a special place in Ayyar initiation, so much so that the terminology, I have talked about this as well. So basically, I conclude here for you the following. Here we are dealing in the 10th century with a rebellion that takes place by a group of people who are called the Mazdakites, Zandids. In point of fact, what they are, I argue, are Mithraic associations in which people lived communal lives because they made an oath of being brothers and sisters to one another. They drank wine together. They took from the rich and they gave to the poor. In fact, in this and in a lot of other examples of the Mithraic dimensions of the Ayyars, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that we are here dealing what they call Mazdakite uprising is actually a Mithraic uprising put in the context of a world that is, has been basically devastated by drought, by poverty, and by injustice. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Professor. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Prushariati. Our next speaker is Dr. Mir-Djalali, a recent PhD from the University of Toronto and currently the postdoctoral fellow of Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies. He will be speaking on From Personal Property to Communal Identity. Dr. Djalali.
Good. So, hello everyone. Thank you for being here with us. I would like to thank Dr. Tavakoli and his colleagues for making this symposium possible, and also Dr. Jehan Bagli for being a source of inspiration. I would also like to express my sincere gratitude to the Elahé Omidyar Institute, and again, Dr. Tavakoli for supporting my postdoctoral project, which this paper is part of it. Around the year 107 after the king Yazdgerd, which makes it 758, 759 of Common Era, in Asbgerd, a village in the region of Delhi Delan in Tabaristan, a man called Zadoy, son of Ashtad, dies, leaving no heir behind. In the month of Mir of that year, his niece, Pidarush by name, appeals to the judge of their district and requests his Dadistan, or judicial decision, about Zadoy's legacy. The main reason behind her request is that Zadoy, who was presumably a man of substantial wealth, has no male successor in full legal capacity. Therefore, a complex legal institution of Sturi shall apply in order to posthumously provide such an heir for the deceased man. This male heir, when reaches the age of 15, would do two things in this regard. First, to possess the Zadoy's inheritance, which in legal jargon would be determined as khwastagdari, and to continue Zadoy's lineage and name, which would be namburdari. These two technical terms, khwastagdari and namburdari, could summarize the entire inheritance law in that patriarchal society. Almost contemporary to this case, more than 1,000 kilometers southward, on the shores of Persian Gulf, a legal mind of the Church of the East, Ishu Bokht of Revardashir, sums up his argument when he explained why a son's share is twice a daughter. Okay, yeah. Why is the portion of a daughter who is also born to him not equal to the portion of a son? Because there are two functions for a son with respect to his father. First, he is his child. Second, he secures the father's lineage and offspring. A daughter is only born to her father. She does not secure her father's offspring and lineage. Thus, there is half of a son's portion for her. Today, we will study these two functions in some passages in the Zoroastrian legal tradition, along with the corresponding chapters in the legal tradition of the Church of the East. That is mainly because reading these passages together will give us a better understanding of the historical context of these legal propositions. In this trajectory, however, we will not search for so-called influence, but for deeper forms of interactions and possibly dialogues, even though they occur not always in the most respectable manner. The historical circumstances of these texts justify this approach, since during the late Sasanian and early Islamic eras, the Near East witnessed intense intellectual and religious interactions and debates concerning communal identity among various groups, including Jews, Muslims, Zoroastrians, and Christians. These groups engaged in dense polemics about almost everything. In this fabric of society, some of these groups define their inheritance and successorship laws on the domestic level for two essential purposes: to hand down a household's property to the next generation and to continue the name of the head of the household. That is to say, the family identity down through the progeny. On the larger scale, these two purposes would translate to retaining the property inside the community as a capital and to safeguarding a distinctive communal identity generation after generation. Therefore, however unlikely, a dull matter such as inheritance law triggered debates among these groups. The most problematic moment was when a household had interreligious ties due to exogamy or conversion. That was when one of the parties involved converted to another faith or married someone from another religion. This conversion or marriage would usually bring inheritance laws of former and present religions into collision. We will explore this trend in law, in Zoroastrian legal tradition from the late Sasanian to early Islamic eras to see how inheritance law evolved in response to social and economic changes. For that, we will follow a chronological order on our Zoroastrian text as our main body of sources, but we will also read some passages from Syriac legal tradition accordingly. So first, Madian Hazardadistan as the only purely legal text from the Sasanian period, early 7th century. There, the jurist and the author Farrokhmardi Bahraman writes, infidels or ardens do not count as joint debtors, but only as part debtors. Regarding infidels, except the rule that a steward should not be nominated for them, and the object which is due in the line of offspring and descent. We have a lacuna, unfortunately, here. All other decisions concerning them are as those regarding adherence of the good religion. That's Maria Matsok's translation. She explains that this passage sets 3 restrictions for a non-Zoroastrian. First, unlike the Zoroastrians, he would not enjoy collective liability for debts. Second, he would not have a steward, and third, he would not have a share from the inheritance. That basically means he would be liable for debts coming with the inheritance, whereas he would not receive any portion of the inheritance. This ruling concerning exclusion of an Aqdan child from the assembly of the heirs would be reaffirmed in another passage in Madayan Hazardadistan, where it mentions an Aqdan minor child and implies that he could not be considered a legitimate heir. Therefore, if there is no other heir in its full legal capacity, a steward is to be appointed. Yeah. A man who has no wife or has one who is an heir, or except for a minor child who has gone to Aqdani, has no other child, a steward shall be appointed for him. A quick note on stewardry is perhaps needed to clarify the issue, even though we will not discuss stewardry in details here. Stewardry is a specific institution, or was a specific institution in the Zoroastrian family law that applies to generate a son for a man to possess his wealth and to continue his name. The function of this institution is to provide such a male heir for the sonless man. Even though an unrelated person also can do the job, in most cases, one of the relatives of the man enters a certain sort of marriage called chakari. The first male child generated from that marriage would join the sonless man as his son and legitimate heir. Meanwhile, the estate of that man would be in the possession, daresh, and not ownership, khueshi, of the steward to manage. The steward would receive a pension for his service, but shall maintain the estate carefully and eventually hand it over to the heirs. Just a few decades after Farrokhmardi Bahraman, the author of Madayan Hazardadistan, Simeon of Rev Ardashir wrote a short text on inheritance law. He was a bishop of the Church of the East in the city of Rev Ardashir, and who originally wrote his text in Middle Persian, but we now only have access to a Syriac translation. In that text, we find a corresponding passage to those that we just read, as if Simeon was responding to or reflecting on these rulings. That's Amir Harak's translation. A man departs from the world having a son who is not of his religion. The tradition in the world runs as follows. The one who shifts from paganism to another religion is not given a share from his father's inheritance. Just as the son of a pagan man who converts to Christianity is not given from the father's inheritance, so too the son of a Christian man who converts to another religion ought not to be given a share from his father's asset. Almost a century after him, his counterpart and allegedly one of his successors, although he didn't like Simon that much. But anyhow, Ishbakht, who wrote an extensively legal book, also in Middle Persian, which has also survived only in a Syriac rendition, expand on this passage. Children who was born to Christians but become apostates, not wanting to be members of the faith of their fathers, we do not rule that they inherit their properties. So too, wives who are not of the religion of their husbands. If they are daughters or wives of pagans who convert to Christianity, we are not their judges. If they give them the property of their fathers, we do not prevent them from taking it. And if they do not give, we advise them not to quarrel over the property of pagans. Children who are born to a woman from another faith, when the man has no other wife, if their children become Christian, it is legitimate for them to take a portion from their father's household. If they are pagans, it is not legitimate to take their Christian father's property. Back to the Zoroastrian tradition in Ervad, we would find a ruling in line with this discourse that argues if minor Aqdans convert to Zoroastrianism, they would have a salar and can be an heir, stepson and partner brother, and can possess estate and be appointed stew. That's Ervad 11.6 goes that when an Aqdan minor comes to Vehdini, or when someone brings him, then salary over him would be for the person who in that region is the greatest and best. And he himself should take his task, that is to say, he is not authorized to pass his upbringing to someone else. He is authorized to give him property, and with them, i.e. adopted siblings, in partnership, he would be a partner, and it would be his task that if they die, that he would be appointed as a steward over the property of the one who died. In cases of adults, however, conversion to Zoroastrianism will bring all the children to Dini Veh. And that's another passage from from Ervad, but this one is translated by Maria Matzach again. When a man of evil religion converts to the good religion, also every underage child who has born from his intercourse is brought with him. This is revealed in the following Avestan passage: for all of his underage children, not for only one of his underage children, and his wife is not lost to him as a wife, since by taking proper care of her, he does not stay below the minimum required by law, and he is not allowed to have intercourse with her, since that is a sin, and he is not allowed to beat the wife according to the statement, leave the infidel alone. Yes, and also since it is not allowed according to the law to impair her, and he is obliged to give her a daily allowance if she has none, but it is not to be left to the church. Yes, indeed, her daily allowance is our own. The main concern here is to keep the wife away from her native community and also to retain the children inside their father's community. In a parallel passage, Ishbakht observes the same matter from a Christian perspective and expands the ruling over both parents regardless of their genders. What the Blessed Apostle says, that a man who is not a believer becomes holy through a woman who is a believer, and a woman who is not a believer becomes holy through a man who is a believer, is this: when both were previously pagans and one of them, husband or wife, converts to the faith, and in this regard, the Blessed Apostle commanded that they were authorized not to separate from each other if the one who was not a believer wished not to do so. Thus, he says, if there is a brother whose wife is not a believer, and that wife wants to live with him, he would not leave her. And likewise, with a woman who has a husband who is not a believer, this requires them to baptize their children. And in this regard, he says, if not so, their children would be impure, but now they are pure. However, as long as they are not married, he ordered them to marry believers. And this is explained elsewhere. A woman, as long as her husband is alive, she is bound by the nomos. If her husband dies, she is free from the nomos to be for anyone she wishes, only in our Lord, that is from the believers. It is clear that the nomos, which is set for the widows, is set also for the virgins and for men and women as well. The main concern here is the children and which religion they would adopt, but it comes in the form of a religious exogamy and the tension between 1 Corinthians 7:12-14 and 1 Corinthians 7:39. However, Ishubocht explains that, or argues that these dicta are not contradictory but supplementary. This legal concerns, of course, was a reaction to an actual socio-political situation. This concern, namely children converting to other faiths as a result of exogamy, has quite a long history in the Church of the East. It has previously appeared in Synodicon Orientale, a canonized version of the creeds of various synods in the Church of the East. In 554 Synod of Mar Joseph, the Catholics of that church at that time sets this ruling. Again, it is said that priests and deacons and sons of covenant go and marry pagan women and get instructed by them and beget children with them. And after a while, once Magians hear of them, they, i.e. children, would be taken and captured, and they would leave Christianity. And people would reproach those priests and deacons for their denier children, kafura. In this regard, we define in this canon that those who do likewise are no longer trusted for the service of priesthood. Similar concern would be found in Zoroastrian tradition. Omidyar Shavashtan, in his Revayat, question 42, argues that if a child born to an interreligious relationship reaches the age of 15 and remains aqdan, the father would be margarzan. In Dastoor Dini, Manucher argues that one is that it's possible that the aner or aqdan woman conceives from that intercourse and begets a child who grows up and associates with the child of the woman's husband and becomes aqdan or aner. The doer of that wrong intercourse is sinful and heavily guilty, as if he brings his own child from Vehdini to Aneri and Aqdani. He would be guilty for any guilt which that minor commits during his minority. And for that he commits during his majority, he would be jointly guilty. For both sides, it is crucially important to retain the child who is born to an exogamous relationship, whether understood as marriage in the Christian tradition or fornication in the Zoroastrian one. But there is another aspect to it, and that is, of course, the financial concerns. We have already seen that in both traditions, a convert child would not enjoy a share from the inheritance. In this regard, Omidyar Shavashtan, who generally applies harsher measures, rules that in addition to depriving the apostate child from a share of the inheritance, it is legit to confiscate his own property. An aqdan son, everything he receives from his father and mother when he is wehdan, would it be for him when he is aqdan or not? When a man goes from Vehdini to Aqdani and reaches Aqdani, immediately incurs guilt of one tanapul. If he is gone from the path of Vehdini year long, he would be margarzan. If he has any property, all of it would be under Poweryai Damanam. The explanation of Poweryai Damanam is that any Vehden who first seizes that property is authorized over it for his ownership. During this time, doing this is difficult. If it should be so done, it is allowed when it goes forth, because it is not like the one who has inherited Aqdeni. An Aqden son, if stays year-long in Aqdeni, not being retained, there is a property in his father's dudag, or household or family, of which that Aqden son has a share that he has not yet taken. Then this property is totally removed from him, and as it is written above, this property is for Vehdenan if they can seize the share of that Aqden according to Poweryai Damanam, and in their ownership possess it, and they are authorized not to give it to the Aqden. For them, seizure is allowed. When we have seen so far that both traditions have similar concerns, conversion and exogamy, that would suggest a relatively high rate of these two during the late Sasanian and early Islamic eras, and it is reasonably in line with the unstable historical situation and vibrant social fabric. Despite the relatively introverted nature of our sources, traces of interactions could be recognizable. While Farrokhmari Vahraman in Madayan Hezar Dadestan argues that Aqden children would not have a share from their father's inheritance, Simeon of Rev Ardashir draws on the laws of pagans to exclude children who leave Christianity for another religion. When Herbadistan sets that a former Christian who converts shall provide his Christian wife with daily sustenance in order to prevent her from soliciting help from kilisa or church, Ishubuk rules that newly converts stay with their non-Christian spouses to keep the children close by. Mar Joseph bans clergy from marrying those he calls Magians, because then so-called Magians will come and take the children away. By the same token, Emid and Manucher consider the Zoroastrian man who has an Aqden child with an Aqden woman, Margarzan. We have also seen that both traditions pursue two similar objectives in their distinctive inheritance laws, Khwastagdari and Namburdari. On the one hand, the entire sets of rules are designed to hand down the property of a household to the next generation through male progeny. On the other hand, to keep the name of the head of the household alive. These two objectives are not, of course, confined in the realm of private law and are not exclusively concerned with personal property. They reach beyond these domestic affairs and enter a broader sphere of communal identity by appealing to all means to retain the next generation and their property as communal capital within their own borders. That is because the mentality in a patriarchal society is that discourse shall go on and on. That is why Pidarush went to the judge of the district of Dele Delan to allow her to continue the lineage of her late uncle. This idea of continuity, that it shall go on, is reminiscent of a river in the minds of our ancient lawyers, as Ishubocht and Manucher write almost verbatim. The 61st question and answer that you ask, how the division of the property of inheritance would be among the Vehdenan and how they must treat that. Manucher answers, the answer is that the property in inheritance reaches from top to bottom like water when it runs down a declivity in a stream. If the downward outlet is shut, it will return upward. Otherwise, it would not go back. As in Ishubocht, he writes, and why does the inheritance not go to the father and to the mother and to the brothers once there are a wife and sons and daughters, while the former are also close to him, the deceased, in one generation? Because the inheritance is accustomed to go from top to bottom and not from bottom to top, like water, which goes from top to bottom and not from bottom to top according to its nature. A son to his father is like a brook to a river. It is not a river that takes from the brook, but a brook takes from the river. Brother to brother is also like the stream which takes from the river, but they separate in their running from each other. Why sometimes does a father inherit his son or a brother inherit his brother? When a man who has no wife, but he has a father and mother and a brother, it is necessary to direct the inheritance to them, because when waters are blocked from the bottom, they become pressure to run upward. Thank you. Thank you.